indicted, but Curley and Schultz were. Why? The reason they were indicted was because Mike McQueary needed protection, because he only had Joe Paterno somewhat backing him up. If they had not indicted Curley and Schultz, it would have been a situation where Mike McQueary would have been essentially hanging out on a limb except for Joe Paterno. Without Joe Paterno, there's no indictment in this case, period, because the case stunk to high heaven in November of 2011. That's why the grand jury investigation took 3 years, because they couldn't get any damn evidence, and they didn't trust their number one victim, Aaron Fisher. So in order to go forward with this and to go to war against a celebrity, a local legend, somebody who ran a charity for at-risk kids and who had dozens of foster kids and adopted kids, they needed a witness who was bulletproof. So what did they do? They wrapped a force field around him by indicting Curley and Schultz and taking the attention off of the second mile, putting it on Penn State. And Joe Paterno, by telling the truth of this matter, at least as far as he could remember, or perhaps McQueary told him to remember, is the reason why Sandusky's in jail right now. Because if Joe Paterno, go ahead and applaud that, because it deserves to be applauded. If Joe Paterno had said, I just don't remember what Mike told me in a year that he can't remember, and I can't remember, and everybody thinks it's 2002 and it's actually 2001, I guarantee you they do not indict Jerry Sandusky, and that grand jury investigation may still be going on today, because McQueary is vulnerable at that point. He's completely out on a limb by himself. But Joe Paterno took the risk, had to know that there was going to be blowback for this, and told the truth, at least as far as he knew it. And that, I think, is amazing that he ends up being the scapegoat in this. Now, as far as the McQueary episode from the other perspective, we talked a lot about McQueary, not a lot about the actual victim. Here's what we now know about the actual victim. The victim was almost 14 years old. He was not 10. When I say that publicly, people freak out. Oh, are you saying it's okay? He's 14. No, morons. What I'm saying is that a 14-year-old has a vastly different understanding of what is happening than a 10-year-old. By the way, the person in that shower was 2 years away from winning a varsity letter on his high school football team. This was not a situation where someone could have been raped without knowing it. And on November 9th of 2011, this man, as a 24-year-old married sergeant in the Marine Corps, came in the middle of a crap storm like there's never been before, and he went into the offices of Joe Amendola voluntarily with his mother and gave a statement to an FBI-trained former police officer which unequivocally said, I am the boy in the shower. I remember the door slamming. McQueary never made himself known to us. He's lying. Nothing sexual happened with Jerry that night or any night. Now, unfortunately, we're living in bizarro world where we are supposed to interpret victim statements through one lens and one lens only. And that is, if they said it happened, it happened. If they said it didn't happen, it still happened. That is bizarro world. Now, I'm not suggesting, see, people say, oh, but John, compliant victimization. I get compliant victimization. There's compliant victimization, and then there's the relationship that Jerry had with this particular boy. Because Jerry didn't bring just anybody into the locker room. This was a son to Jerry Sandusky. This was a guy who drove 10 and a half hours just 2 years before the crap hit the fan from North Carolina to where Jerry's mother's funeral was. This is a guy who had Jerry stand in for his father at his final high school football game. This was not a boy that was raped. Now, did Jerry ever rape a boy? I have no idea. Interestingly, none of the other victims at the time of the arrest, at the time of the crap storm, said anything close to an allegation that would be consistent with what Mike McQueary claimed. But But now, see, the biggest problem that the media created with this lie about anal rape is that everybody presumes that's everybody's allegation, right? I'm sure people in this room do. I did. I even thought, well, oh my gosh, they got 10 people who are claiming that Jerry Sandusky raped them? That's impossible for it not to be true. But that's not the allegation. In fact, they only had 2 victims who claimed sex in November of 2011. And one of them, there's an audio tape of his own lawyer conspiring with investigators to trick him into saying that. Most of the victims didn't even claim sex at that time. And the prosecution wants to tell you that victim number 2 doesn't exist. Which gets me, by the way, to Armin Katayan, which is one of the funniest, amazing statements in that whole deal there, where he says that Penn State officials were aware of assaults in the shower in 2000 and 2002. Wow, that's interesting news, Armin. Because first of all, there's no evidence Penn State was aware of anything in 2000, which is the so-called janitor episode that Ray has completely blown apart. Obviously, the 2002 episode didn't happen in 2002. It happened in 2001. And by the way, Armin it's amazing how Armin can't get anything right. Armin just a few weeks ago, when Penn State announced for the 15th time, hold on a second, I'm on a roll. When Penn State announced for the 15th time that they were settling with victims, and Armin went on the CBS Evening News, and the top story was that Penn State had suddenly decided for the 15th time to announce that they were settling with 26 victims for $60 million. Scott Pelley asks him, so how many of the victims have settled from the original trial? And Armin says, well, 2 have not, but 8 have. Well, I'm not that great at math, but I know Ray is probably laughing right now because that's an incredible scoop that Armin got there, because they don't exist. There aren't 10 original victims. 2 are non-people. So I actually tweeted Armin. I said, Armin, you got an incredible scoop here. Penn State is now settling with people who don't exist. But this is a guy who actually is supposed to have researched the case to the point where he is CBS's main reporter on this. It's extraordinary, the lack of understanding. Just recently, on the Victim 6 case, which Ray and I differ on greatly, because I don't believe a crime occurred in 1998, and I think it was perfectly plausible and right for there not to be a charge there, based upon the circumstances of the case and the circumstances of Jerry Sandusky. But I think a closer look at the Victim 6 case shows this whole case stinks to high heaven. And interestingly, one of the things about Victim 6, who has not settled with Penn State, bizarrely, Penn State is fighting the Victim 6 case, which I find as bizarre as anything in this whole case, because Victim 6 is the only person who testified at trial in a specific episode that occurred on Penn State's campus of the original victims. And yet Penn State's fighting that one, and it was found to not be a criminal act at the time. And every time it gets reported, every time you see it, it's Victim 6 was molested or was abused in a Penn State shower. Well, it's not true. You read his own testimony at trial. Victim 6 reads like a witness for the defense. And yet I recently wrote to a local reporter. I said, why don't you tell people what he's actually alleging? And this is the actual response I got from a local reporter who may even be here tonight. He said, here at Ground Zero, our readers know all the details and we don't need to regurgitate them. I mean, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? The reality is this, folks. If people knew the full story of the Victim 6 case, they would really open their eyes about what happened here. Because, in my opinion, it turns this entire situation on its head about what really transpired and what did not. A couple other real quick points before Franco's beard turns gray from the things I'm going to say. I think one of the most underrated things about what happened that week was that the game was at home, airing on ESPN. And I think Ray makes an outstanding point about the indictment being shifted from what was supposed to be the day of the Nebraska game to the week before when Penn State was not playing. Because the media needs an end. They need a story to have an ending. There needs to be a pressure point. This is why they love trials and big city car chases. It's easy, it's simple, we know when it's going to end. So because Joe Paterno was going to be celebrated at Beaver Stadium for what would have been his last home game after he announced his retirement, that put an enormous pressure point on something happening before then. If they had gotten past the Nebraska game, I don't think Joe Paterno ever gets fired. Because now we have only away games, there's no fear of a pep rally for Joe Paterno at home, and Thanksgiving's right around the corner, the media gets tired, they're bored, they move on. I truly believe that's one of the many things that transpired that caused this thing to happen the way that it did. One other thing, and this is the big picture here. You know, I interviewed Jerry Sandusky in prison, and I've had a lot of correspondence with him and Dottie Sandusky, and my vision of what really transpired here has evolved quite a bit. I mentioned at the start here that I'm a truth guy. I believe strongly in the truth, even if it's unpopular. And even I flinched in this particular story, because when I went on the Today Show to talk about the Sandusky interview, well, I didn't feel nearly as strongly about it then as I do now. I had grave suspicions about the nature of Jerry Sandusky's pedophilia. I do believe that he is a pedophile, but I believe that the nature of his crimes are vastly different than the public perception. And it's the only way, in my view, this story makes sense in its totality. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to say that, because then you are a bad person if you actually say what you think the truth is. And by the way, when in the course of human history has there ever been a situation where that shouldn't set off alarm bells? That what you think, based on facts, actually knowing more than most people, maybe anybody else knows about a story, makes you a bad person. Then you're not allowed to even think that. Well, I'm sorry. In my world, I immediately presume, whoa, there's something wrong here. If I'm not even allowed to think it, if it's that bad, if it's that horrible, if I'm a bad person, whether it's religion, politics, or climate change, or whatever it is, if you're a bad person because you think it, maybe there's a reason why people are so willing to intimidate you. Maybe they don't really have a good case. And it is my view that even though I do not like Jerry Sandusky as a person, and I actually like Dottie, I gunned to my head, I do not believe that Jerry Sandusky ever actually had a sex act with a boy. And the reason why, I have many reasons why I believe that, but the number one reason is it makes no sense based upon how this case evolved. And by the way, I'm gonna cut it. You want to talk about the media? Well, the media, I'm talking about the media because the reality is this is a thought that you're not even allowed to have in the media. And even I softened it quite a bit when I went on the Today Show and Piers Morgan, because I knew my main message, which was Joe Paterno getting railroaded, was going to be obliterated. But the news media, they don't care about facts. They don't care about details. This case is far too complex for them. And they're not about the truth, folks. They're about ratings. They're about revenue. And here, you know, there's a couple reasons why the truth, in my opinion, has lost here. Now, I know Franco is the ultimate optimist. I would be an optimist, too, if I had caught the Immaculate Reception. He's going to give me 1 minute to tell you why the truth lost here. Here's the bottom line reality of why the truth lost in this case. Cowardice. There were enough of the right people in the right positions who knew what really happened here, but no one wanted to risk their own livelihoods, their own reputations, their own fortunes to do what was right. And it may be the greatest regret of my life getting involved in this story, because it's going to end up meaning that my career is over. My life is going to be dramatically changed to the negative because of this. My 1-year-old daughter will probably only know me as a loser because of my role in all of this. But I know one thing. I know I was right about what happened here. I know I'm right about what didn't happen here. And I will urge you one last time to please tell your children and your grandchildren the truth of what really transpired here, because that is the only way the truth is going to survive in this case. The only way, because it's not going to happen in the near future. And the truth has got to still matter, folks, and it's only up to us to make sure that it does. I thank you for coming and for your time, and thank you for your support.
It's 9:20, so let's